Pre-video Martin here, just wanted to do a quick disclaimer. I have previously had a gaming channel, which did that I was a part of the Riot Games kind of influencer sphere. Essentially, I got a Riot gun buddy for Valorant. I was invited to some capture events when there was a new agent or a new hero and stuff like that. Riot Games have of course never paid me, and that doesn't affect anything that I say in this video, but just important to have that disclaimer and enjoy the video. If you're seeing this video, Riot Games anti-cheat called Vanguard has been rolled out to all League of Legends players worldwide. However, what does that really mean for your security and privacy? My name is Martin and I work with offensive cybersecurity, and I want to answer that question and help you understand the cybersecurity risks of Vanguard. Now, Vanguard was developed by Riot Games and shipped with Valorant, which is Riot's entrance into the tactical first-person shooter market. On the release of Valorant on June 2nd, 2020, a lot of concerns was raised about having Vanguard installed on your device. While there was many hot takes, there are three big concerns that really was raised. One, Riot, which is an American corporation, is majority owned by Tencent Holdings, a Chinese technology company. Tencent acquired an equity interest of almost 93% in Riot Games on the 18th of February 2011 for the small price of $230 million. Two, Vanguard runs in Ring 0 on that user's device, giving it almost unfettered access to the underlying operating system. And the third one, to play any game that requires Vanguard, such as Valorant or, as of now, League of Legends, Vanguard has to run as soon as the computer boots. While there are many other famous anti-cheats like BattleEye and Easy Anti-Cheat, which you probably heard about, they both run in Ring 0, but they only start when the game is started. Some users raised concerns about Vanguard running even when the game is not running itself, and called out the company for developing an invasive and risky software. Now, this brings us to today, where Vanguard is required to play the popular MOBA League of Legends. League of Legends has hundreds of millions of players. This is actually also quite a big deal because when Valorant was released, it was a brand new game. If you did not want Vanguard on your device, you could just not play Valorant. However, League of Legends was released almost 15 years ago, way back in 2009. So players have invested significant amount of time and also money into the game, and is now told to install Vanguard or lose access to that game and also the time investment and that financial investment that they've done. Now, from the point of view of someone who works with cybersecurity, and if I put my offensive or my essentially hacker hat on, there are essentially two questions that I think needs to be answered. One, is Vanguard even necessary and worth the potential security and privacy risks? And two, should you avoid having Vanguard on your computer, potentially even get a separate gaming device or another solution? Let's answer the first question. Is Vanguard necessary? Now, there are a lot of videos of cheaters being able to bypass Vanguard and therefore cheat in the game such as Valorant, and there will probably soon be the same videos on League of Legends. So if that's the case, why even bother with something like Vanguard at all if it's so intrusive? Well, the ideal argument is that an anti-cheat is very similar actually to an antivirus. It's not meant to be a silver bullet, and not even remotely. It's supposed to kind of increase the development cost of the exploit. So in the case of an anti-cheat, the point is to make the development time of the cheat itself more costly. Essentially, if the skill level of the developers are required to be higher, there will be a fewer amounts of them, and also it will have a larger amount of time. The developers will have to put more time into creating the cheat and to bypass Vanguard, and that increases the cost of the cheat itself. On top of that, there will be fewer devs, fewer developers that are technically capable or would want to because of the enormous time sink and cost compared to potentially what will be able in other games. So fewer devs will create essentially a monopoly on the market. Meaning when a cheater or a cheat itself is detected, a larger percent of the cheating player base will be using that specific cheat and will therefore be banned. So essentially, each cheat that is found and then banned will hopefully affect a larger percentage of the cheating player base in total. And the last one is, again, that all of that kind of adds the barrier of entry for the cheater, the purchasers, the end users, which are the real problem, really, right? People developing cheats for the video game is not necessarily, bad if they just never used it, but the point is that they're distributing them to a lot of other people that are ruining people's games. By increasing the barrier of entry for those end users, by, for example, having higher costs, doing that when a ban happens, it affects a larger amount of them, and that the cheat itself has to be harder to use and more invasive, it's gonna increase that barrier of entry and hopefully dissuade a lot of people for even trying to get their hands on that cheat. Now, what about Ring Zero, right? The anti-cheats are running in kernel mode. Is that really necessary? And the short answer is really yes. Any effective anti-cheat today needs to be able to monitor stuff such as the Windows API calls, memory read and write processes, and also what processes are generally running on the computer, among other things. Vanguard does something special compared to something like Easy Anti-Cheat or BattleEye, which again are Ring Zero anti-cheats, right? These kernel mode anti-cheats, because they need to be effective. But Vanguard, of course, runs on boot. And this is just, again, to make it harder for cheat developers to bypass the anti-cheat. Normally, a way to bypass these Ring Zero anti-cheats is to create a loader. So the loader will load the game, and of course that will trigger the run of something like a BattleEye or an Easy Anti-Cheat. And then because there's a loader, they are able to easily bypass that and access memory without the anti-cheat really being aware of it. Compared to how you have to bypass Vanguard, which essentially is you need to make a kernel driver, right? So this very intrusive driver, install it on your computer and make that one boot before Vanguard. So when the user turns on the computer, the cheat has to load and then Vanguard has to load, which is significantly harder and more complex. On top of that, it's more invasive, right? Because what people are concerned about with Vanguard is essentially what people will have with these cheat developers, just that if you think that having an American corporation owned by a Chinese corporation is shady, imagine that you're giving a kernel driver, essentially a rootkit, on boot access to some shady anonymous cheat developer to your device. The fact that people believe that those are not backdoored is baffling to me, and that people really want to pay money to cheat in a video games and compromise all the security just to get that. It is incredibly shady. But the point is that is another barrier of entry for those users and for those cheat makers, because it's harder to make those kernel drivers and make them work. Now, what about the security risk of having a Ring Zero, a kernel mode program from a majority owned Chinese company, or an American company majority owned by a Chinese company to be just specific, on your computer, which runs on startup? And it's actually important to note that you can disable Vanguard on boot. That's essentially what I have. I have gone to my task manager, gone to my startup tab, and I just turn off Vanguard among other programs. That way they won't turn on when I turn on my computer. And then if I need to play Vanguard, I just enables. If I need to play Valorant or now League with my friend, I go to my startup, I enable Vanguard, restart my computer, Vanguard will load, I can play my games. When I'm done playing for the night, I go to my startup, turn off on boot, kill Vanguard down in my system tray, and I'm pretty good. On top of that, really a nation state actor does not need a kernel driver to spy on you. And just to kind of emphasize that, let me show you what I mean. So here I am on my Kali Linux instance. I have this file running on a local web server. And if I can access that, you can see that I have a file called gameinstaller.exe. Now, gameinstall.exe is just a little piece of malware that I have generated. If you're interested, you can generate it using the following command. This will create what we call a meterpreter payload, which essentially will give us a kind of built-in, easy to use, full access over a compromised computer. And it's just told to kind of call back to my IP address of my Kali on port 444, and that this is supposed to be an executable file called gameinstall.exe. I've done this on my Kali Linux web server, and before I go over to my victim machine, I have started up the Metasploit framework. Here I have, if I go to my options on this, I have gone and created a exploit multi-handler, which will essentially receive this connection from my victim when they run my malware. And I'm just listening on that 192.168.113, so the IP address of my Kali Linux box, and it's listening on that port 444. If I tell run, you can now see that it started to listen, and it's essentially waiting for the victim to run my payload. So if we go over here to my Windows machine, you can see that there's a couple of files. The first one is a file just called top secret file. This just contains a text called very secret. This is kind of just a proof of concept to show. And then I have the gameinstaller.exe. Now, if I would do this as if I was installing a video game like League of Legends or Valorant or similar, I would, of course, right-click on this and run it as administrator. And you can see that nothing happened. Ideally, of course, now, a game would install, but it could, of course, do other things in the background. That's kind of the major point. Malware is just a program. This program just happens to connect and give me remote access to this machine, but TeamViewer does the same. It allows people to connect and control your computer. The other thing is that, of course, that this one is supposed to be a bit hidden. TeamViewer isn't. But it's kind of trivial to bake that into an update of a video game or a program that you're using, such as, for example, Discord or Spotify. If they wanted to, they could bake in malware straight into their software and give remote access over your computer. They would, of course, be financially doomed if they did, but that's fully possible. If I hop back over to my Kali, you can now see that I got a connection from my victim and that I've gotten a session. If I type the shell command, I will now get a terminal on that user desktop. If I type whoami/priv, you can say I have a lot of privileges because it runs as administrator. And if I list all the files, you can see that there is that top secret file. I can write that out by typing type and then the name of the file and enter, and you can see that it typed very secret file. I'm now administrator on this device. I can install additional malware, I can put ransomware on it, I can keylog the user, I can steal cookies, I can rummage through the pictures and download everything. I have fully compromised this just by the user running an executable. I don't need them to install a kernel level driver or anything like that. Maybe for persistence to continuously let myself in, but in general, as someone who just wants to gain access to this user, I don't really need something as sophisticated as that. And neither really does any company. We've seen this through cybercrime a million times. There's not really anyone that uses kernel level drivers to gain access. The vast majority is done through good old executables, either run on a user level, or if you're super lucky as an attacker, as administrator, just to give you that extra, that easy foothold, so you don't have to obtain administrator yourself in other ways. So with that in mind, that they don't really need a kernel driver if they wanted to get malware on you, we need to talk about something that sounds incredibly boring, but is called security boundaries. Security boundaries is something that essentially is where are you putting your layers of security. For example, do you trust an American corporation, right? A general American company? Do you trust them with their software on your device? At some point you have to, right? You have to accept certain amount. For example, you might be running Windows on your device, and that's developed by Microsoft. Do you trust Microsoft? And you might put up a security boundary, which is quite common in a lot of government agencies around the world, especially in Europe and in the West. Russian software, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, has been, banned, not allowed, as people looks at it as a threat to their business. So, for example, something like Kaspersky, which is a Russian antivirus company, which has some great antivirus and some great researchers, and put out great research in the past of malware and threats and exploits, are not allowed. And it would be kind of weird if you say we're not trusting any Russian software on our devices, like Kaspersky, but we're gonna have this other, Russian software which does our financial details, right? That an executable file which launches like a financial software or something like that. That would be kind of weird that you didn't trust the antivirus because it has a lot of access, but you do trust the financial software and running that. If the point is that we don't trust Russia because the government can force companies to roll out certain updates on our infrastructure. And that's a security boundary, right? The security boundary being that we don't trust anything from Russia because Russia is an authoritarian state and the government has way too much control over the corporation. And you might say, well, that's why I don't trust Vanguard, right? The Chinese government has a lot of control over Chinese companies. And so you might say, I don't want any Chinese software on my devices because who knows what the Chinese government is making the company do. And if that's the case, then we should have stopped, or if that is your security boundary, then you should have stopped having League of Legends when Tencent bought a majority stake in Riot Games back in, 2011? Because that is when that security boundary was crossed. You might not have known by then, or you might not have known the severity of the Chinese corporation, but as soon as you understood that the Chinese government had control over their own corporations and you viewed that as a threat, for example, over the recent discussions of TikTok and how, the US want to ban TikTok, probably heard about it in the news. As soon as you were aware of that, and if you agreed that that's a violation, a security boundary, then you should have removed League of Legends. If you believe that an American company who has a majority, who a Chinese company has a majority stake ownership over, is breaking your security boundary. It should not be when they tell you to install an anti-cheat, because you've already been pulling updates over and over and over again. Now that doesn't mean that you don't want to remove League of Legends. You might, now that you are aware of the problem, want to remove it because, well, I don't want a executable file that is constantly pulling updates, a program that's constantly pulling update, Vanguard or not. I don't want that from a Chinese corporation. You might only have been aware of that like now as I'm watching this video, and then you might re-evaluate your security boundaries and remove that and any other, like for example removing Temu, Wish.com and TikTok from your phone, and removing Valorant and League of Legends off your devices. But then you should also look into other gaming companies and so on to essentially make the policy make sense. And you might be wondering, is it really that bad, right? Why am I so why do I really care so much? And I think this is actually really important. If influencers and other people in the cybersecurity community scare people with scenarios that aren't really applicable, or making weird exceptions like, oh, we don't want the Ring Zero anti-cheat, but it's okay to have the video game that pulls updates down to us all the time, I think that's kind of bad, right? You might say that, well, more security is always better, right? But actually, no. A average person who does not breathe cybersecurity, like if some people like us that work in the cybersecurity field, are only really able to focus on a given amount of issues in cyber because they do other things for a living. So what is really applicable for them is to focus on not reusing passwords and having strong individual password, making sure they have 2FA on all their accounts, or as many accounts as humanly possible. Watch out for scams like stuff on social media, on email, phone calls, and so on. Being kind of aware of those scams because that's really where they're gonna be hit the most. Not through some video game that has been running on the computer since 2011 from from this that's been owned by a Chinese corporation, and now that they have this kernel level anti-cheat, that's kind of where maybe a nation state actor will drop some malware or siphon out some data from that. Again, I think that is gonna just like essentially add confusion and add like a false sense of security. The focus will be on, oh, I don't have Vanguard on my computer, so I feel safe now, instead of their focus being on actually enabling 2FA on their accounts and setting up password policy. I do believe that the discussion is important. I think it's a good discussion and a good communication. I just think that the threat modeling and the security boundaries are kind of weird. It seems a bit arbitrary to freak out about Vanguard, but not freak about the executable and the installer that pulls updates constantly. And that's why I made this video. If you're wondering what I'm doing personally, again, I have it installed on my private computer. Of course, I don't run it on a work laptop or even anything that I could ever use for a client engagement, which makes no sense anyway because it's a work laptop. But I run it on my personal computer. I disable Vanguard, on boot. It never runs on boot, like most application never runs on boot on my device. And then when I need to play League or Valorant, I just turn it on, I play some games, I have a blast, and then I go into my system tray and I disable Vanguard. Because now I'm done playing the game, and if I want to play it later that evening, I restart my computer. That's how I like to do it, but that's just because I don't like Vanguard running and hogging up a bunch of resources and stuff like that, which it actually does, and also kind of ruins it if you're fucking around on your computer. It kind of starts stopping programs from running. It stops, stuff that I sometimes should do in a VM, I do on my personal computer because I'm lazy. And it's annoying because Vanguard tries to stop me from time to time, so I just turn it off in general because, why not? It doesn't cost me anything to just reboot my computer. It's a minor inconvenience, but it's an inconvenience I'm willing to live with. And that's my personal advice, but you gotta look at where you wanna put that threat model, where your security boundary starts. Does it start on, I don't trust these Ring 0 kernel drivers from American companies that are majority owned by Chinese companies, or where do your security boundaries essentially start? And I hope that this video was educational. I hope that this helped you kind of get a little bit of a better opinion. I would love to hear what you think down in that comment section. If you like this type of videos, brand new channel, a like would be really, really nice. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely day.